Okay, this is a quick video on thesis statements, specifically literary argument thesis statements. So there are a couple of things you need to keep in mind. Good thesis statements have three elements, and these are the topic, the stance, and the scope. And what the topic means is what it sounds like, the topic of the paper. What are you going to write about? The stance is there's an arguable element to it. A good argument, a good paper argument is not what we consider, bickering, people going back and forth. An argument seeks to unravel the layers of a topic, an issue, or an idea. So the more, think of like an onion, the more you peel it back, the more information you get about that topic. That's what an argument is. So a stance in a literary argument or an academic argument is any position that's backed by evidence that a reasonable person can take either an opposing side or extend that side, extend the argument. Okay? So it has to be something that is arguable. A fact does not make a thesis statement. And then finally, we have the scope. And the scope is how long the text is supposed to be. Now let's say you're writing a 4 to 5 page paper, double spaced. Your thesis needs to be strong enough and specific enough to where you can get a good, healthy 4 to 5 pages to support your thesis, to argue your thesis, okay? That doesn't mean you're going to write only 4 to 5 pages. You should be writing many more, 8, 10, 15 pages, but then you edit them. Writing is editing. Any good writing means a lot of editing. Okay, so let's use the example. Since this is a literary argument, we're going to use the example, one of my favorite stories by Joyce Carol Oates. Story, Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been? Now this is a long title, so I'm just going to call it Where Are You Going, comma, YB, okay, Where Have You Been? So the topic is Joyce Carol Oates, Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been? Right? But let's put it over here. A literary argument thesis. This is a working thesis. Topic is Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been? But that's still kind of broad because there's a lot going on in that story, from concept of duality to characterization to symbolism, you name it. And even within those, for example, symbolism, we have the music, we have Friend's car, we have his name. So you want to specify, especially for a 4 to 5 page paper, that's your scope, how long your text should be. Okay, so we've got the topic of where are you going, where have you been, and we're narrowing it down. So maybe, and this is where we start getting into the stance, so maybe you're fascinated by the role of good and evil in the story. Oops, where are you going? I'm just going to put G for where are you going. The role of good and evil, that's still pretty broad and it needs to be narrowed down more. Okay, so, and this is where we can start narrowing it down. See, here put the concept of duality in there. Remember, Connie acts one way at home and then she acts another way out in public. So maybe you want to focus on the characters, not only characterization, but the characters themselves. And it's okay if you are a religious person and you're informed by your Christianity or your belief in Islam or Judaism or atheism, whatever. It's okay. But you have to work on adopting a scholarly stance, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So you're looking at the idea of good and evil, and then you want to focus on the characters. And this is where we start narrowing it down and even becoming more focused on your stance. Remember, a stance is something arguable. So you can say, well, Connie represents goodness. And we'll play with that later. While Arnold represents evil. Now, if you remember that story, Connie is a bit of a brat. The story is told through her eyes, and she's a typical 14, 15-year-old girl. So she thinks, in the story, she thinks that, remember, her mother is jealous of her because Connie is young and beautiful and the mother isn't. And Connie gets a little bit snarky by saying that her mother was once pretty, if you could believe the pictures. You know, those are ideas, those are comments that a 15-year-old girl would make. So this is a bias source. Connie is a biased character, and that's okay. We're all biased. We just have to address, we have to understand what our biases are and how they shape the way we approach something. So maybe we're not crazy about the word goodness, you know, Connie being good, because she acts kind of bratty. So instead we can change that to innocence. Okay, Connie represents innocence, and Arnold, he can represent evil still, or maybe experience. I'm running out of space. Notice how the stance, the second element in a good literary argument thesis, the stance is becoming much more specific. Connie represents innocence, and Arnold, friend, represents evil or experience. Okay? And again, the stance is something that is arguable, because somebody can say, well, Arnold, he doesn't represent experience per se. He represents a psychopath or a serial killer, and Connie represents victim or naivete, which is, you know, another way for saying innocence too. So we need to move to the scope, and it's 4 to 5 pages. Remember, your paper is going to be 4 to 5 pages, let's say. So you want to get enough textual evidence to support your stance. And so far, right now, we're saying that stance is that Connie represents innocence and Arnold represents evil or experience. So then what you would do is take careful notes of the hold on, I can't write and talk at the same time, of the story. And since you're focusing only on Connie and on Arnold, pay special attention to when those names are mentioned. Now, you should have read the story already. You don't want to write a story, you don't want to write a literary argument or literary analysis without having read the text multiple times, because that shows. Your professor will see that you are BSing, basically. And if your professor's like me, they won't like that BS. So make sure you read the story a couple of times so you understand what the heck is going on in the story. And so when you're rereading it the third, fourth, fifth time, you start focusing on the names. And so what you can do is, in the story itself, just circle all the names or put them in boxes or put a little star next to them. You're basically keeping a running tally of how many times these names are mentioned. After you've done that, then, you know, along notes, you can write notes like, well, what are the images, what are the words used to describe Connie? And then start another column perhaps, and do the same thing for Arnold. Okay? This is still researching. The images, Connie, remember, she has a nervous giggle, a high-pitched giggle, she talks kind of breathily, like she's almost whispering. when she's out in public, when she's meeting boys. But when she's at home, she's kind of languid, and you get the sense that she's kind of sarcastic. Her voice isn't so childlike when she's out in public. When she's at home, she's adopting more of an adult tone, or what she thinks an adult tone is, and an adult attitude. It's like she can't be bothered. So you trace the images and the words and the dialogue for each of these characters. Now, if you look for my students, if you look in the videos that I've provided for you on taking notes, you'll see 3 types of note taking, which is the Cornell Notes method, the T-journal, also known as dialogic notebook, and then the reporter's trick. Whichever way you decide, whichever note you decide to take, 2 very important words you should use, you should ask. And those of you who are not in my class and you just happened upon this video in my YouTube channel, you can scroll around and see the video there, note taking. How and why. How does Connie represent innocence? Or how does Joyce Carol Oates paint with words Connie as innocent? You might want to define what you mean by innocent too. And then you can do the same thing with Arnold. How does Joyce Carol Oates paint Arnold as experienced or as evil, whichever word you want to use? Okay, and those are all the careful notes that you've been taking, looking at the images, the words, the dialogue that they use. And so you're still developing. You've got your topic and you've got your stance. Your topic is where you're going, where have you been, and your stance is it's morphed. Look at these note taking. It's morphed to Connie representing innocence and Arnold representing experience or evil. And now you need to focus on the words how and why. How does Joyce Carol Oates paint these characters as innocent or as experienced? And then why? And you can focus on both, or you can choose how or why. You don't have to do both. Again, keep in mind the scope of your paper. If your paper is only 4 to 5 pages, you may want to stick with one of the words. How does Joyce Carol Oates construct Connie as innocent? How does Joyce Carol Oates construct Arnold Friend as experienced or as evil? And then you can develop that with textual evidence. That is your argument. Restate it. That is your argument for this paper. Or you can focus on why. Why? Not necessarily Joyce Carol Oates constructing. Why does she do that? Unless you know her and you can call her up and ask her, it's going to be tough to figure out. But you can ask her, you can answer or ask the question like, why does Connie go with Arnold at the end? Okay, now you're trying to get into Connie's mind. And the same way you took careful notes to look at the images and the words, the description and the dialogue to identify Connie as being innocent and Arnold as being experienced, you'll do the same thing, careful notes, looking at why Connie is going with Arnold at the end. What leads up to her leaving with him at the end? Now be careful, you don't want to retell the story. Put a little ban right there. Do not retell, do not summarize the story. The story has already been told, and quite brilliantly actually, by Joyce Carol Oates. So this is where your interpretation comes in. Based on the notes you took, why is Connie afraid? Is she happy? Is she terrified? Is she depressed? Based on the notes you took outlining Connie's character, Then you start interpreting why she decides to go with Arnold Friend at the end. We don't know exactly what happens at the end, but we do understand that something bad is going to happen to her. So why would a 15-year-old girl decide to go with somebody who, it comes out, is quite evil at the end? Okay? Focusing on either how or why will help you stay within the scope. This particular scope, it's 4 to 5 pages, the double space, the paper. Again, you will probably, and I'm going to argue you should, work towards getting a lot more pages done, a lot more notes. And as you're writing and drafting, you're going to write a lot more than 4 to 5 pages. And that is fine. It's much better to have, say, maybe 8 or 9 pages of a strong draft, a rough draft, that you can start pulling away from to tighten up your final draft, so it will end up being the final 4 to 5 pages, instead of starting with just 2 or 3 pages and then you wonder how are you going to fill that up, because you need to have 4 to 5 pages, and that's where you start putting filler or fluff or BS in. Don't do that. Write a lot more. Take good notes, take lots of notes on the story. Focus on your topic, focus on your stance. It must be arguable, remember, and you must be able to back it up by evidence, and specifically textual evidence. And what I mean by that is evidence that comes directly from the story. You can't say, you know, what your Uncle Bob says about this story, unless your Uncle Bob is a famous literary critic. And you can't say, you know, I feel, I think, I believe. Obviously you think that way because you're the one writing the paper, but you need to find scholarly or credible, CRAAP-tested evidence to support your argument, to support your claim. And first and foremost, you want to get evidence from the primary source. Okay? And the primary source is the story, the poem, or the play, whatever you are writing about. Okay? Secondary sources is scholarship or blog, well-written blog, a credible blog written about the primary source. Okay, so here we have the primary source, and then we have the secondary source because it's text written about the primary source. The essay that you're writing will become a secondary source because you're writing about the primary source, which is the story, and in this case it's Joyce Carol Oates' Where You're Going, Where Have You Been? Okay, so before I end this, I'm going to address this. I see a lot in student writings. They want to talk about, or they want to bring in their own religious beliefs in their text. And that's fine. However, it's also dangerous because it's very easy to just rely on your religious beliefs without providing that key magical word, evidence. So a good way to work on this is by working towards adopting scholarly distance. And what the scholarly distance or scholarly stance means is you are vetting those sources and vetting yourself too. And what that means is, I'm going to spell yourself, CRAAP test, critique. My students, you know what CRAAP test is because of the infographic that I posted in the syllabus. Those of you who are visiting this YouTube channel, if you go to my professional website in the resources section, you can find a CRAAP test infographic. You are critiquing. You are again asking how something is constructed and why something is constructed. The how focuses on the framework of an idea, of a story, of a text. The why starts bringing in causes that led up to it, to idea, text, etc. And psychological reasons. Okay, You should always critique. The more you critique, the more you ask how and why, the more you CRAAP test something. And what CRAAP test is, real quick, is look at currency, reliability, author, audience, and point of view. You can even say 2 CRAAPs. Purpose. Let me write purpose. Purpose. Why is that text written? Why is that advertisement produced? Okay. How old, for the C, currency, how old is the text? Reliability. How reliable is it? Can it be corroborated by other credible sources? The author, who wrote it? Is it Bob down the road who wrote it? Or is it a scholar, somebody with a PhD who specializes in that field? Who is the audience written for? Is it written for 5-year-olds? Or is it written for doctoral level students? Or is it written for first year, second year college students? It does change the language and the tone and the point of view. What is the perspective? What is the bias that they're coming from? And why are they writing that? The purpose. So you want to CRAAP test everything. Get in the habit and you critique a text. You critique how that text is written and produced and why it's been written and produced. And that is what a lot of people who bring in their own religion in their text do not do, and they just automatically assume that because it's written in the Bible or the Torah or the Quran that it's automatically true. That is their spiritual belief, their faith, and that's what faith is. It's without evidence. But in the world of literary criticism, in the world of academia, we want evidence. Think of the scientific method. Other people, other scholars, other credible vetted sources corroborate the information that you have. That's when we start getting into that scholarly distance and we start getting into evidence. Okay? Quick, easy way to keep this in mind also is all text like this should be written in third person point of view, not first person. So you don't say I think or I found this story. No, it's third person point of view. He, she, it, they. And you avoid saying things like I think. I believe. Or what I see a lot, I feel. That does not belong in an academic essay. Okay, so I hope this quick, maybe not so quick, quick video lesson on writing good thesis statements for literary arguments has helped. Since this is a video, you can pause and you can review my notes. This is the way I take notes. It makes sense to me. You find a way to take notes for you, but I have covered the main elements of the three elements of a good thesis statement and specifically a literary argument, using Joyce Carol Oates' Where Are You Going, Where Have You Been as an example, and how we started narrowing it down, the topic, narrowing it down, the stance, which is that arguable point, narrowing that down, to questions to ask, different note-taking strategies, to all this stuff, primary source, secondary source, evidence, and adopting a scholarly distance or scholarly stance. I hope this helps, and I will probably make more of these more of these videos using my dot camera.